The sun of Zyphora was dipping below the jagged crystal mountains, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The city of Aelaris, the capital of the Aelari people, shimmered under the fading light. Its tall towers reflected the last rays, making the streets glow like liquid silver. Everywhere one looked, the Aelari moved with purpose, strong, proud, and disciplined. Among them, Princess Liara stood out. She was a warrior by birth and choice, trained from childhood to fight, lead, and survive. Her silver hair shimmered like the moonlight, and her eyes, sharp and determined, seemed to see everything. Liara was respected and feared, not just for her skill in combat, but also for her strict rules. Among those rules, the most unusual one was about marriage. She refused to marry any male from her species. The Aelari men, strong and disciplined, were nothing she desired. Liara believed a husband should be more than strength. He should be clever, brave, and different from the ordinary. The palace buzzed with preparations. Today was not just any day, it was the ceremonial gathering for ambassadors from nearby planets. Liara's father, King Tyrus, had promised that the family would form an alliance with a visiting species. Yet, he had left an unexpected twist. Liara would need to take a husband for this alliance to succeed. She had protested, of course, but the king was firm. The future of Aelaris rests on unity, he said. You will accept the union, Liara, or we will face instability. That is no choice. Among the dignitaries arriving, one figure was unlike the rest. He was tall, but his presence was calm and understated. Kale, a human from Earth, stepped out of the transport ship. His dark hair framed a serious, quiet face. Unlike the Aelari, he spoke very little. He observed the palace and the people with curiosity and attention, but without making a sound. The court whispered immediately. He is silent. Too quiet. What can he offer? Liara first saw him during the welcome ceremony. She could not hide her surprise. He did not bow excessively, nor did he try to show off strength. He simply stood tall, calm, and collected. Liara felt an unusual sense of curiosity. This human was nothing like the men of her people. As the ceremonies continued, a message from the king called Liara to the throne room. She entered to see her father sitting with Kael beside him, awaiting her. The king spoke plainly. Liara, Kael will be your husband. This union will strengthen relations between Aelaris and Earth. I trust you will honor it. Liara's eyes narrowed. She had heard of human stories of their ingenuity, but also tales of weakness. She had expected a small, timid man. Instead, Kael looked calm, patient, and alert. He did not speak, but his eyes met hers steadily. I am your husband? Kael finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. It carried no arrogance, no attempt to impress, just honesty. Liara felt a strange tension. She had never expected words to come from him, yet they held a strange power, commanding attention without shouting. The court murmured, unsure how to react. Liara, accustomed to command, simply nodded. It seems so, she said. Then let us proceed. Days passed after the formal ceremony, and life in the palace began to adjust. Kael stayed quiet, but his actions spoke louder than words. He walked through the halls, observing, noting, learning. He studied the Aelari customs quickly, not to blend in, but to understand. Liara watched him carefully, expecting mistakes, expecting weakness, but found none. One morning, Liara found Kael in the training arena. He was watching the young warriors spar, his expression calm, unreadable. He did not join them, nor did he react to their mistakes. Yet, when a trainee stumbled, Kael quietly corrected their posture, his movements precise and gentle. Liara raised an eyebrow. You teach them without saying a word? She asked. Kael turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Some lessons are better shown than spoken, he said simply. Liara blinked. There was no arrogance in his tone, only quiet confidence. She had never met a man who could lead without speaking, who could command respect through actions alone. The next weeks revealed more of Kael's subtle strengths. In conversations with advisors, he remained silent. Yet when he finally spoke, his words carried clarity that no Aelari had offered before. When the palace engineers struggled with the alignment of a transport beam, Kael quietly observed, then suggested a slight adjustment. The engineers implemented it, and the beam worked perfectly. His actions and advice were simple, yet effective, and the court began to notice. Liara, however, struggled with her feelings. She had married a human she barely knew, and yet, she could not ignore his presence. He was quiet, yes, but he was intelligent, strong in ways different from the Aelari, and thoughtful in ways she had never experienced. She watched him often, noticing small things, the way he handled objects, the way he observed people, the way he never wasted words or movements. One evening, during a quiet walk along the palace gardens, Liara finally spoke to him. "Kael, why are you so calm? Nothing seems to bother you." No one else here could endure this chaos with such patience. Kael smiled faintly. "I observe first. I act when it matters," he replied. "Rushing does not solve anything." Liara felt a flicker of admiration. This human, this silent husband, was teaching her something she had not expected to learn. Strength was not always about power or skill with a weapon. It was about patience, wisdom, and timing. The peace of the palace, however, was fragile. Whispers of discontent spread among the Aelari. Some nobles murmured about Liara's choice, questioning why she would marry a human when there were strong, worthy Aelari men available. Others feared the unknown. The human's silent nature made them suspicious. Yet Kael faced none of these challenges with anger. He did not argue, did not demand respect. He simply observed, and in time, people began to notice small, undeniable truths. When Kael suggested a course of action, it worked. When he moved to assist, accidents were avoided. Even Liara's most loyal advisors found themselves quietly trusting him. One day, Liara brought Kael to the edge of the training arena, where she often practiced alone. "Show me something," she said, smiling slightly. "Show me what makes a human different from us." Kael's gaze softened, and for the first time, he touched the sword at his side. It was a ceremonial blade, light in his hands but perfectly balanced. He did not swing it recklessly, nor did he boast. Instead, he moved with precision, cutting through obstacles with skill and timing that seemed almost unreal. Liara watched, astonished. Each movement was calm, controlled, and effective, yet there was an elegance she had never seen in Aelari combat. By the time he finished, the sun had dipped fully below the horizon. Liara stood silently, awe filling her chest. She had expected weakness. She had expected a quiet, ordinary human. Instead, she had found someone extraordinary. Kael sheathed the sword gently, looking at her without pride or arrogance. "Strength is not loud," he said quietly. "It is knowing when to act, and how." Liara could not hide her amazement. In that moment, she realized that everything she thought she knew about humans, about strength, and about herself, was about to change. Kael was not silent because he lacked power. He was silent because he had learned the most important lesson of all. Action speaks louder than words. That night, as the stars rose over Zyphora, Liara lay awake, thinking of her silent husband. She had married him for duty, for alliance. But she was beginning to wonder if she had also married him for something far more important. The chance to learn, to grow, and perhaps, to love. Outside, Kael walked through the palace gardens, moving as quietly as a shadow. He paused, looking at the distant mountains, the glimmering towers, and the city that had once seemed alien to him. He had come here not as a warrior, not as a visitor, but as an observer. Yet now, he felt a strange connection to this place, to its people, and to the princess who had seen him not as a silent human, but as a man. In the quiet of Zyphera, the world shifted slightly. Unknowingly, the human had arrived, silent and unassuming. But soon, everything would change. The princess had taken a silent human as her husband, but the story of KL was only beginning. The weeks that followed the ceremonial union were unlike anything Princess Liara had expected. KL, the silent human she had married for duty and alliance, continued to amaze her not with words, but with quiet, steady action. The palace was alive with whispers. Some nobles still questioned the wisdom of Liara's choice, while others began to see what she had realized long ago. There was something extraordinary about him. Liara watched KL closely during these days. He moved through the palace with careful observation, never rushing, always alert. He learned the customs of the Aelari quickly, not by imitating, but by understanding. He adjusted subtly to their ways, respecting their traditions while quietly improving them. Servants began to rely on his advice. Soldiers paused to notice his movements. And even Liara's closest advisors found themselves seeking his opinion. Yet, he spoke very little, letting his actions communicate more than words ever could. One morning, the princess found KL in the palace library, surrounded by massive holographic projections of engineering designs and city layouts. He was examining the flow of energy through the palace's defensive shields, noting minor misalignments and suggesting tiny adjustments. Liara approached quietly, curious. "You spend much time here," she said. KL looked up and smiled faintly. "Understanding comes before action," he replied simply. "I watch. I learn. Then I act." Liara nodded. She understood the wisdom in that approach. Humans were different from Aelari. They did not rely solely on strength. They observed, reasoned, and adapted. KL's presence was a lesson in patience and intelligence, one Liara was beginning to appreciate more deeply. The peace of the palace, however, remained fragile. Rumors of unrest in the neighboring systems reached Aelaris frequently. Liara's people were strong, but the rival factions were clever and unpredictable. The king expected Liara to maintain stability, and KL to support her not with words, but with skill. One afternoon, as Liara trained in the arena, KL joined her. He did not pick up a weapon immediately. Instead, he watched her, noting the fluidity of her movements, the precision of her strikes, and the timing of her defensive maneuvers. Liara glanced at him, expecting a comment, but he remained silent. Finally, he spoke softly. "You rely on force. Strength is important, but timing and understanding are stronger." Liara raised an eyebrow. "And you would demonstrate this? How?" KL simply picked up a practice sword, its weight perfectly balanced in his hands. His movements were smooth, precise, almost like water flowing over stones. He struck at targets with speed and accuracy that defied the expectations of even the most skilled Aelari soldiers. Each motion was controlled, deliberate, and without waste. Liara felt a flicker of awe. "Impressive," she said quietly, stepping back. "You are unlike any human I imagined." KL smiled faintly. "Some humans are quiet, but observation makes them strong. Strength is not only in muscles, it is in mind and patience." The next test of KL's hidden strength came unexpectedly. The palace received news that a group of smugglers had attempted to sneak past the outer defenses. Normally, the palace guards could handle such threats with ease. But KL insisted on joining the investigation. Liara followed him, curious to see how he would act outside the controlled environment of the palace. KL moved with silent precision, scanning the paths and passages with keen attention. He noticed small details that others overlooked: footprints, displaced stones, and faint energy signatures. Following his observations, the guards discovered hidden compartments the smugglers had used, retrieving stolen items before any real loss occurred. Liara watched silently, feeling pride and amazement at the silent human who had become her husband. Kale's calm approach prevented chaos and avoided unnecessary confrontation. The Aelari began to realize that this man's value was not in loud displays of power, but in intelligence, strategy, and precision. Days later, a festival in the city square presented another opportunity for Kale to demonstrate his abilities. Delegates from multiple planets gathered, bringing exotic foods, technologies, and rare artifacts. Among them, spies and opportunists could easily blend in. Liara kept a cautious eye on the crowd, while Kale moved quietly, scanning and observing without drawing attention. Suddenly, a disturbance broke out near the main stage. A group of performers accidentally knocked over a ceremonial display, and in the confusion, some valuable artifacts were at risk. Without hesitation, Kale stepped forward. His hands moved swiftly to stabilize the display, guiding the performers and securing the artifacts, all in a calm, controlled manner. No one was harmed, yet the problem was solved efficiently. The crowd murmured in admiration. Liara smiled at him, realizing that his silence was a form of wisdom. Kale did not seek recognition, but his actions spoke volumes. The Aelari began to see that humans, especially Kale, were more than they had imagined. Liara herself began to trust him deeply. She consulted Kale on political matters, training routines, and palace security. Each time, he responded thoughtfully, offering simple but brilliant solutions. Some suggestions were so small they seemed insignificant, yet they changed outcomes dramatically. Kale's quiet influence began to shape the palace in ways no one had anticipated. One evening, Liara and Kale walked along the palace balcony, overlooking the city bathed in the soft glow of Zyphora's twin moons. The air was cool, fragrant with alien flowers, and calm. Liara spoke quietly, almost to herself. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known. You do not speak much, yet your presence changes everything." Kale looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I do not need to speak to act. The right action at the right time is louder than words." Liara thought about that. She had been trained to rely on strength, on direct action, on leadership through visible power. Kale had shown her a different way. Strength in thought, strategy, and patience. His quiet confidence challenged everything she knew about power. The next challenge arrived faster than expected. Reports came that the rival faction had sent scouts near the outskirts of the city. They were testing defenses, seeking weakness. The palace council was anxious, but Kale remained calm. "We must observe first," he advised. "Rushing will reveal our plans." Liara followed him as he moved through observation points. He studied patterns, noted energy flows, and identified potential blind spots. Then, without making a sound, he coordinated the palace guards to adjust defenses subtly. The rival scouts approached, expecting easy targets, but found the city ready and fortified, thanks to Kale's guidance. The scouts retreated without incident, leaving the city unharmed. Liara could hardly believe it. Her silent husband had saved the city without a single loud command, without confrontation, without chaos. His strength was hidden, yet undeniable. That night, Liara sat in her private chambers, thinking of Kale. She had married him for duty, for alliance, but she now realized he had become more than a political tool. He was her equal, a partner, and perhaps the key to a brighter future for her people. Kale, meanwhile, continued his quiet routines. He trained with Liara in the evenings, studied the city's infrastructure, and explored Zyphora's landscapes during the day. He never boasted, never demanded attention, yet his actions were shaping the palace and its people. The Aelari nobles were divided. Some remained skeptical, uneasy about a human influencing their world. Others began to respect Kale, seeing how his intelligence, patience, and skill were unmatched. Even Liara's father, King Tyrus, found himself quietly admiring Kale's abilities. The silent human, who had arrived with no claim to fame or strength, was quietly changing the perception of humans on Zyphora. One day, During a formal inspection of the city's defenses, Kale surprised everyone. A sudden structural instability threatened one of the energy bridges connecting palace towers. While the engineers panicked, Kale moved quickly, calculating the balance, adjusting the supports, and stabilizing the bridge, all before anyone could react. The engineers stared in disbelief. The bridge, which could have collapsed, now stood firm. Liara approached him afterward. "You are remarkable," she said simply. Kale smiled faintly. "I observe, I learn, I act. That is all." Liara shook her head, feeling a mix of admiration and wonder. She had married a human who seemed ordinary at first, but who was quietly extraordinary. He was not just her husband. He was a teacher, a strategist, and a reminder that strength could take many forms. The story of Kale's hidden strength spread quietly through the palace. Whispers of admiration replaced skepticism. Even those who had doubted him could no longer ignore the truth. Humans, silent and unassuming, could possess power beyond imagination. Liara began to trust him completely, relying on his judgment in matters of diplomacy, defense, and strategy. She realized that Kale's silence was not weakness, but wisdom. Every movement, every decision, every calm observation revealed a mind far beyond ordinary comprehension. As the moons of Zyphora rose high in the night sky, Liara and Kale stood side by side on the palace balcony. The city slept beneath them, safe and secure, unaware of the quiet human who had changed everything. Liara smiled, realizing that her marriage had become far more than duty. It had become partnership, trust, and respect. Kale, still quiet, looked at the stars. He had come to this world without fanfare, without recognition. Yet his actions had begun to shift the balance. Not just for the palace, but for all of Zyphora. And he knew that greater challenges were coming, challenges that would test his strength, wisdom, and patience even further. The silent human had proven his hidden strength, and the world, slowly but surely, was beginning to take notice. The city of Alaris glowed under the twin moons of Zyphora. Calm and peaceful, or so it seemed. Despite the recent successes, Princess Liara knew that challenges were never far away. Rival factions beyond the borders of the kingdom had begun to notice the unusual strength of the silent human, Kale, and the unity he brought with Liara. Whispers of his skill and wisdom traveled faster than official messages. Some envied him, others feared him. One morning, urgent news reached the palace. A fleet of scout ships from the neighboring system had been detected approaching Zyphora. Though they were not immediately hostile, their presence suggested surveillance and testing of defenses. The Council of Aelari advisors was tense. They argued over the proper response. Some called for a show of force, others for negotiation. Liara, standing beside Kale, listened quietly. Kale's calm voice finally broke the tension. "We must observe first. Acting hastily will reveal our strategies and may provoke conflict." Liara nodded. She had learned to trust his judgment completely. The council exchanged uneasy glances, but Kale's reputation for wisdom was now well established. Over the next several hours, Kale led careful observation. He monitored the scouts' movements, analyzed their energy signatures, and predicted their maneuvers. He noticed patterns the Aelari had overlooked. When the scouts tested minor energy barriers, Kale instructed the palace engineers to subtly reinforce weak points. By evening, the city's defenses were optimized without any indication that they had been adjusted. Liara watched him quietly, admiration and respect deepening. This was the human she had married, a man who acted with intelligence, strategy, and patience, rather than brute force. His calm presence reassured not only her but everyone who witnessed his actions. As night fell, the scouts approached the outskirts of the city, probing carefully, attempting to find weaknesses. Kale directed the palace guards to maintain positions, but he also implemented clever diversions. Holographic projections of false structures, subtle energy pulses, and minor adjustments in lighting that made the scouts' sensors report inaccurate readings. The scouts, unaware, were walking into a maze carefully designed to protect the city while revealing nothing. Liara's heart pounded with a mix of excitement and pride. She had seen Kael's strength in small ways before, but now, he was orchestrating an entire defense operation quietly, efficiently, and without fear. The Aelari soldiers followed his guidance willingly, even those who had once doubted the human. When the scouts finally retreated, realizing the city was far more prepared than they anticipated, the council erupted in applause. King Tyrus himself approached Kael. Placing a firm hand on his shoulder, "Your insight has saved us from potential conflict," he said. "We owe you more than words can express." Kael simply nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Observation and understanding prevent unnecessary risk," he said quietly. In the days that followed, the reputation of Kael grew throughout Zyphora. He was no longer just Liara's husband. He had become a symbol of the human capacity for intelligence, strategy, and quiet courage. Nobles and citizens alike began to see humans in a new light, understanding that strength could take many forms beyond physical power. Liara and Kael continued their partnership, training together in the arena and overseeing the palace defenses. Yet, challenges were not yet over. A message arrived from an outer colony. A natural disaster had struck a nearby settlement. Energy storms had damaged structures and disrupted communications. The colony requested immediate assistance, fearing further damage. Liara consulted Kael. "This could be dangerous. The storms are unpredictable." Kael studied the reports and projections carefully. "We can assist," he said. "We must plan carefully, prepare the teams, and act at the right moment. Panic will make it worse. Calm and strategy will save lives." Liara admired the simplicity and wisdom in his words. Together, they organized a team of engineers, medics, and Aelari soldiers. Kael mapped out the safest routes, calculated risk zones, and coordinated resources. Liara led the transport squads, while Kael directed actions from observation points. When they reached the colony, chaos had already taken hold. Some buildings were unstable, and energy flows fluctuated dangerously. Liara and Kael moved swiftly. Kael's calm instructions guided the workers, and his predictions of unstable zones kept the team safe. Liara fought alongside them not with violence, but with authority and precision, ensuring no mistakes were made. By nightfall, the colony was stabilized. Lives were saved, energy grids restored, and structures reinforced. The colonists, who had heard tales of Kael's abilities, stood in awe. They had expected humans to be weak or unskilled, yet this one had led them safely through disaster. Liara, exhausted but proud, turned to Kael. "You've done more than I ever imagined." "They will never underestimate humans again," Kael simply smiled. "They will understand if they observe. Strength is seen through actions, not assumptions." The events at the colony solidified Kael's reputation. Across Zyphora, people began to reconsider their beliefs about humans. They saw that intelligence, patience, and courage were as valuable as any physical skill. Liara watched with quiet pride as her husband, silent but brilliant, reshaped the perception of an entire world. Weeks later, the royal palace hosted a celebration for the success of the colony relief effort. Delegates from surrounding systems attended, curious to witness the human who had become a legend in such a short time. During the ceremony, Liara stood beside Kael as he spoke briefly, addressing the crowd in his calm, deliberate manner. "Humans may be quiet," he said, "but we act when it matters most. Strength is not always loud, and courage is not always visible. Observe, learn, and act wisely. And even the smallest effort can change everything." The crowd erupted in applause. Liara's heart swelled with pride. This man, whom she had married with doubt and curiosity, had become a leader, a teacher, and a symbol of unity. As the ceremony ended, Liara and Kael walked together along the palace balcony, overlooking the city that had once seemed alien to him. The twin moons reflected on the towers and streets below, casting a serene glow. "You've done more than I ever imagined," Liara said softly. "You've changed our people, and perhaps even the galaxy. without raising your voice or seeking glory. Kael looked at her, calm as always. Action speaks louder than words. Unity grows when people see results, not when they are told to believe. Liara smiled, realizing the truth in his words. She had once thought she was marrying a silent human out of duty. Now, she knew she had married a partner, a teacher, and a guide who had shown her and her people the extraordinary potential of humans. The Aelari and humans began to work together more closely. New alliances were formed. Trade and knowledge flourished, and a sense of mutual respect spread across Zyphora. Kael's presence had created not only safety and success, but also understanding and harmony. Months later, as the city of Aelaris prepared for another festival celebrating unity among species, Liara and Kael stood side by side on the palace balcony. Citizens below waved and cheered, honoring the partnership that had brought a new era of prosperity. Liara glanced at Kael and felt a surge of gratitude and admiration. "You've changed everything," she said quietly. Kael smiled faintly. "We changed it together." The story of the silent human who had become a legend spread far beyond Zyphora. Humans across the galaxy gained newfound respect, not through aggression or loud displays of power, but through intelligence, patience, and courage. Kael's actions had proven that even quiet individuals could shape history, inspire others, and bring about great change. Liara and Kael remained together, partners in life and in leadership, facing challenges with calm, strategy, and unity. Together, they looked toward the future, a future filled with hope, understanding, and the promise that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes quietly, sometimes unexpectedly, but always powerfully. Under the twin moons, the city slept peacefully. The silent human had not only become a hero, he had become a symbol of a new era, where courage, wisdom, and quiet strength reshaped the destiny of an entire world. And in the heart of the palace, Liara and Kael stood together, ready to face whatever the galaxy might bring, knowing that with patience, understanding, and trust, anything was possible.